The $400 billion dollars ghost. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, checking your phone, and finding out that Apple has gone bankrupt. The stock is zero. The offices are empty. The patents are being sold for scrap. It sounds impossible, right? Companies that big don't just die. They are too big to fail. But in Canada, this actually happened. Once upon a time, there was a company so massive, so powerful, that it was worth 1/3 of the entire Toronto Stock Exchange. It employed 90,000 people. It built the invisible backbone of the internet that you are using right now. If you were a Canadian in the year 2000, you didn't just know this company. You depended on it. Your pension was in it. Your parents' retirement was in it. The government's budget relied on it. Its name was Nortel Networks. At its peak, it was worth nearly $400 billion. Today, it is a ghost. A cautionary tale taught in business schools. But here's the part the textbooks leave out. Nortel didn't just die of natural causes. It didn't just lose to competitors. It was murdered. It was killed by corporate arrogance, accounting fraud, and, if you believe the intelligence reports, one of the greatest acts of industrial espionage in history. This is the story of how Canada lost its crown jewel, and how a few executives in suits burned down the house just to keep their bonuses warm. The fiber optic gods. To understand the fall, you have to respect the height. In the late 1990s, the world was going through a revolution. The internet. Suddenly everyone needed to be online. But the internet isn't magic. It's physical. It needs cables. It needs switches. It needs data to move at the speed of light. And nobody, moved data better than Nortel. While the Americans had Cisco and Lucent, Canada had the engineers in Ottawa. They developed a technology called fiber optics that was years ahead of the competition. They built a machine called the OC-192. I won't bore you with the engineering, but think of it this way. The competition was building dirt roads. Nortel built a 12-lane superhighway made of glass. By the year 2000, roughly 75% of all internet traffic in North America was flowing through Nortel equipment. If you sent an email, Nortel carried it. If you made a phone call, Nortel connected it. They were the gods of the new economy. The CEO at the time, John Roth, was treated like a rock star. He was named CEO of the Year. When he walked into a room, the stock price went up, and the stock, Nortel became the national treasure. It went from $20 to $50 to $80. Taxi drivers were day trading it. Grandmothers were buying it. It became a cultural rule in Canada. You buy Nortel, and you hold it forever. At its peak in the summer of 2000, Nortel shares hit $124.50. The company's market cap was bigger than the GDP of many countries. The euphoria was intoxicating. The executives in Ottawa truly believed they had conquered the world. They thought the party would never end. But parties always end. And usually, the drunkest person in the room is the last one to realize the music has stopped. The acquisition. Bender. Here's the problem with being a growth company.
The OC-192
Wall Street is a cruel
represents
master.
the pinnacle of optical
Once you tell the
networking
market,
technology.
we will grow by 30% every year. You have to hit that number. If you grow by 29%, the stock crashes. By the year 2000, the organic growth, the real sales of real equipment, was starting to slow down. The internet bubble was getting full. Everyone who needed a fiber optic cable already had one. So how do you keep the stock price going up?
Every great idea starts with a spark.
You cheat. Or in corporate speak, financial engineering. Under John Roth, Nortel went on a shopping spree, an acquisition bender. They started buying other companies, not because they needed the technology, but because they needed to show growth. They bought a company called Bay Networks for $9 billion. They bought Alteon for $7 billion. They bought Qterra for $3 billion. They were paying billions of dollars for startups that had barely any revenue. They were paying in Nortel stock, which they treated like printed money. It was a classic bubble strategy. Use your overvalued stock to buy other companies, add their revenue to your books, and pretend you are growing. It works great, until your stock stops being valuable. And then there was the vendor financing trap. This is where it gets dirty. Nortel wanted to sell equipment to the new dot-com companies, but those dot-com companies had no money. So Nortel said, "Don't worry, we will lend you the money to buy our equipment." Think about that. And I lend you $100. You use that $100 to buy a phone from me. I record $100 in revenue. It looks like I made a sale. But no actual cash came into the building. I just moved money from my left pocket to my right pocket. They were building a castle on a foundation of bad debt. But as long as the stock price was $120, nobody asked questions. The auditors stamped the papers. The banks cheered. The Canadian government smiled. The first crack. In late 2000, the dot-com bubble burst. Pets.com went to zero. The internet startups vanished. Suddenly, all those companies that owed Nortel money...
Financial engineering.
The billions of dollars in vendor financing evaporated, but inside Nortel's headquarters, the culture had shifted. It wasn't about engineering anymore. It was about the bonus. The top executives had stock options worth millions, but those options were only valuable if the company hit its earnings targets. Enter Frank Dunn. Frank was the CFO, Chief Financial Officer, the numbers guy. A former competitive swimmer. Intense. Aggressive. When the real sales started to dry up, the pressure fell on Frank Dunn and the finance team to make the numbers work. They looked at the quarter. They were missing the target. If they missed the target, the stock would tank, and the executives would lose their fortunes. So they opened the accounting toolbox.
No money.
And they found a trick called the cookie jar. In simple terms, when times were good, Nortel would put aside extra money into reserves. The cookie jar, for a rainy day. But they were using these reserves illegally. They would release money from the jar and call it profit to fake a successful quarter. They were manipulating the reality of the company
and it is a
trigger
cash
their
return,
own bonuses.
But it's not actually a sale.
They were painting over the rust on a sinking ship. In early 2001, the cracks started to show. The company issued a warning. Growth might slow down.
No cash.
The stock dropped from $80 to $40. Panic set in. But the executives didn't say, "We are in trouble." They said, "We are on track. Buy the dip." And Canadians listened. They poured their remaining savings into the stock, thinking it was a bargain. Little did they know they weren't buying a dip. They were buying a ticket on the Titanic, and the captain had already sold the lifeboats. The return to profitability. Lie so, the ship was taking on water. The dot-com bubble had burst. Revenue was plummeting. But in the executive suites of Nortel, the priority wasn't saving the ship. It was saving the bonuses. In 2003, Frank Dunn, the new CEO, the former CFO, made a bold promise to Wall Street. He said, "We will return to profitability." It sounded heroic. It sounded like a turnaround story. But behind closed doors, it was a magic trick. Here's how the scam worked. ELI 5. Imagine you run a lemonade stand. You lost money all year, but you have a secret jar of coins you hid under your bed last year. The reserves. To trigger your bonus, you need to show a profit today. So you take the coins from under the bed, throw them in the cash register, and scream, "Look! We made a profit!" That is exactly what Nortel did. They released millions of dollars from their hidden accounting reserves and booked it as current income. They manipulated the balance sheet to turn a loss into a fake profit, and it worked. In early 2003, Nortel announced a profit. Wall Street cheered. The stock price jumped, and most importantly, the return to profitability bonus clause kicked in. The executives paid themselves tens of millions of dollars in bonuses. Frank Dunn alone took home millions. The top brass popped the champagne. They patted themselves on the back for saving the company. But it was a lie. The profit wasn't real. It was just money they had moved from the left pocket to the right pocket. And while they were cashing their checks, the people who actually built the company were being walked out the door. The bloodletting. Canada ghost town. While the executives were playing accounting games, the reality on the ground was a massacre. To keep the costs down, Nortel initiated one of the most brutal downsizing events in Canadian history. They didn't just fire people. They had decimated the workforce. From a peak of over 90,000 employees, the number started dropping. 60,000, 40,000, 30,000. In Ottawa, the suburb of Canada, which was known as Silicon Valley North, turned into a ghost town. Parking lots that used to be full of luxury cars were suddenly empty. For sale signs popped up on every lawn. Engineers with PhDs were driving taxis. Families were torn apart. And then the stock market woke up. In 2004, the accounting irregularities were discovered. The auditors realized the numbers didn't add up. Frank Dunn was fired.
Trust them?
The company was forced to restate its earnings. Basically, they had to admit, oops, we didn't actually make a profit. We lost money. The trust was broken. The stock entered a death spiral. It went from $120 to $10 to under $1. It became a penny stock. The national treasure became a national joke. But the biggest tragedy wasn't the stock price, it was the pensions. Thousands of Nortel retirees had their life savings tied up in the company. They believed the executives. They held on. When the company eventually filed for bankruptcy protection, the pension fund was underfunded. The health benefits vanished. Grandparents who thought they were secure were suddenly looking for work at 70 years old. The executives got their golden parachutes. The workers got a cardboard box. But incompetence and greed are only half the story. While Nortel was busy imploding from the inside, something much more sinister was happening from the outside. Someone else was watching the chaos, and they were taking notes. The silent invasion. In 2004, a Nortel security employee named Brian Shields noticed something strange. Brian was a veteran. He was ex-military. He knew how to look for threats. He started seeing the weird data patterns in the network. He discovered that someone was logging into the CEO's account and the accounts of the top scientists. They were downloading documents. Thousands of them. Technical schematics, research papers, source codes, the crown jewels of Nortel's technology. Brian traced the IP addresses. They weren't coming from a competitor in Silicon Valley. They were coming from China. This wasn't just a hacker in a basement. This was an industrial vacuum cleaner. The intruders had installed rootkits, spyware that buried itself deep in the system. They had the passwords of the executives for years. Years. While Nortel's management was fighting about bonuses, invisible ghosts were walking through the digital hallways, stealing everything not nailed down. Brian Shields tried to warn the executives. He told them, the house is on fire. They are stealing our future. And the response? A shrug. The executives were too busy fighting lawsuits and trying to save the stock price. They didn't care about security. They just changed a few passwords and moved on. But down the street, a mysterious new competitor was rising. A company called Huawei. Suddenly, Huawei's products started looking familiar. They looked like Nortel products. They worked like Nortel products, but they were half the price. Nortel was being hollowed out. They were spending billions on R&D to invent the future, while hackers were stealing it for free and manufacturing it cheaper. It was the perfect crime. A death by 1,000 cuts. And in the final part, we will watch the giant finally fall and see who picked up the pieces of Canada's greatest company for pennies on the dollar. The Long Goodbye, January 2009. By 2008, Nortel was a zombie.
Too many.
The hackers had the technology, the competitors had the market share, and the executives had the lawsuits. The global financial crisis of 2008 was the final nail in the coffin. Credit dried up. Nobody wanted to lend money to a company that had been cooking its books for half a decade. On January 14, 2009, Nortel Networks filed for bankruptcy protection. It was the largest corporate failure in Canadian history. In Ottawa, the mood was funereal. The Carling campus, Nortel's massive futuristic headquarters that looked like a spaceship landed in the forest, went silent. This was a place that once housed the smartest minds in the world. Now it was just 2 million square feet of empty cubicles and shredders.
From the inside?
And then came the vultures. When a giant dies in the wild, the meat doesn't go to waste. It gets picked clean. Nortel wasn't sold as a whole company. It was chopped up and sold for parts in a garage sale for the tech industry.
Listen.
Ericsson Sweden bought the wireless division. Avaya USA bought the enterprise unit. Sina USA bought the optical networks. The pride of Canada was sliced up and shipped to foreign competitors for pennies on the dollar. Even the building itself, the mighty Carling campus,
I told you we
was
need
sold
to
the Canadian
prioritize
Department of
this.
National Defense. Where
No,
engineers once
we need to
invented
focus on the
4G
bonuses
technology,
first.
bureaucrats now push paper. It was a poetic depressing end to the dream of innovation, but amidst the wreckage, the liquidators found one box left in the attic, a box labeled as patents. And this is where the story gets insane.
Still here. And
The $4.5 billion bidding war. Nortel was dead, but its brain was still valuable. Over decades, Nortel engineers had filed over 6,000 patents. These weren't useless papers.
Familiar?
These were the nuclear codes of the mobile internet. Patents on 4G, LTE, Wi-Fi, and data switching. Basically, if you wanted to build a smartphone in 2011, you needed Nortel's permission. Suddenly, the biggest tech companies in the world woke up. Google, Apple, Microsoft,
Slow
Samsung. They all realized, whoever controls these patents controls the future of the smartphone wars. An auction was held in 2011. It was a gladiator match. Google started the bidding. In typical nerd fashion, they bid weird numbers like $1.9 billion, then $2.6 billion, then $3.14 billion, not into pie. But they were outmatched. Steve Jobs, Apple, and Steve Ballmer, Microsoft, who usually hated each other,
Game over?
realized they had a common enemy, Google and Android. So they formed a supergroup, a cartel. They called it the Rockstar Consortium. Apple, Microsoft, Sony, Ericsson, and BlackBerry joined forces. They slammed a bid on the table, $4.5 billion. Google folded. The Rockstar Consortium won. Think about that. The dead company's leftover paperwork sold for $4.5 billion. This proved one heartbreaking fact. The technology was never the problem. Nortel's engineers were geniuses. The value was real. It was the management that was worthless. The verdict: crime without criminals. So with the company sold and the patents gone, what happened to the men who crashed the plane? What happened to Frank Dunn and the executives who manipulated the accounting to trigger their bonuses? The RCMP charged them with fraud. The prosecutors argued they deliberately cooked the books. The trial lasted months. It was complex. It was boring. And in 2013, the judge delivered the verdict: not guilty, acquitted on all charges. The judge ruled that while the accounting was aggressive and the bonuses were suspicious, there wasn't enough proof of criminal intent to defraud. Basically, being bad at your job isn't a crime. Being greedy isn't a crime. Frank Dunn walked free. He kept his freedom, though his reputation was destroyed. The employees? They lost their jobs. The pensioners? They lost roughly 30 to 40% of their expected income. The shareholders, they lost everything. And Brian Shields, the security hero who warned them about the Chinese hackers, he lives in a modest house, retired. Meanwhile, Huawei, the company that allegedly built its empire on the back of Nortel's stolen secrets, is now the largest telecom equipment manufacturer in the world.
too
They
late.
didn't just eat
And
Nortel's lunch, they ate the whole restaurant. The cost of arrogance. What is the lesson of Nortel? It's a lesson about the difference between innovation and financial engineering. Nortel started dying the moment it stopped being run by engineers and started being run by accountants. When the goal shifts from building the best product to hitting the quarterly target, the soul of the company rots. They bought companies they didn't need. They faked profits they didn't have. They ignored security threats they didn't understand. They treated the company like a stock ticker, not a living organism. Canada has never recovered. We haven't
Wrong
produced
incentives.
a global tech giant since. We went back to digging oil and selling houses to each other. Nortel's a ghost story. It's a reminder that too big to fail is a lie. If you stop innovating, and if you let the wolves in the back door while you're counting your bonuses at the front door, even a $400 billion giant can bleed to death. What do you think? Was it just bad management, or was Nortel truly killed by corporate espionage? And where were you when the stock crashed? Let me know in the comments below. If you want to understand another Canadian disaster, the housing market, click this video right here. Thanks for watching. Welcome to the Loonie Logic.